Good morning. My name is James Prappis. I'm an attorney in Houston, Texas with Kane Russell Coleman Logan, and I'm on the board of directors of the U.S. Mexico Bar Association. Thank you for joining us today. We have two accomplished speakers who will speak to us today on human trafficking. First, we have Vanessa Perez, who's an experienced attorney with the Galveston Houston Immigration Project. Vanessa has an LLM from Georgetown University and is licensed to practice law in Texas. She will speak to us concerning legal remedies for human trafficking survivors. Next, we have Dr. Albertico Guinto Sierra, who is a licensed attorney in Mexico City. Albertico has a doctorate, master's degree, and bachelor's degree in law, practices in Mexico City, and has extensive experience as well. The biographies of both speakers and their PowerPoint presentations will accompany this visual presentation. Thank you for joining with us and your support of the USMBA. Welcome, Vanessa, and thank you for speaking to us today.
Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Perez. I wanted to first thank the United States Mexican Bar Association for inviting us to participate in this conference. Today, I'm going to talk about the legal remedies of human trafficking for human trafficking survivors. Before the Trafficking and Violence Protection Act, or what is called the TVPA, was issued, human trafficking was prosecuted as peonage, which is a system where an employer compels a worker to pay off a debt with work, or involuntary servitude, which occur when a person is working against that person's will to benefit another under some form of coercion that is not related to financial needs. The TVPA created defined crimes of trafficking, enforced labor, and established protection to trafficked persons through immigration relief and other benefits. It also created specialized funding for U.S. service providers for the first time. So I want to talk about some concepts and definitions about human trafficking that are covered in the law. The definition of severe form of trafficking in persons is divided in sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So the term means if it's sex trafficking, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age, it's a minor. Or if you talk about labor trafficking, it would include the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtainment of a person for labor or services, through the use also of force, fraud, or coercion, for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. The most important part, I believe, for everyone to understand and to try to get some information is the elements of trafficking. Those elements that trafficking will give you some tools to identify survivors. The elements of trafficking, according to the law, are dividing process, means, and end. Process includes recruiting, harboring, moving, obtaining, or providing a person. Recruiting usually occurs through a recruiting agency, and it means encouraging or soliciting a person to come to the U.S. to work. Harboring is holding a person in a location where they live or work, or both. Moving is simply moving a person. It could be to and from work, not necessarily crossing the border. Obtaining and providing will include the treatment of a person as a product. The provider will be the person offering, the victim, for example, a pimp, trafficker, and the obtainer is the person obtaining the services of the victim or customer, for example, the solicitor or the farmer. The second element is the means. This is the very important element. It is very important to identify the means when you are talking to a survivor. Means includes force, fraud, or coercion. When looking at this element, you need to determine why the person remained in a human trafficking situation. What will happen if they try to leave? Force, for example, will refer to physical force or things that are keeping the survivor in the human trafficking situation. For example, chains, domestic violence, sexual assault, or including guns. Now, fraud is based on false promises and lies. to keep survivors in compliance and providing those services. For example, if you have a worker that was brought under false promises and was offered, what was offered in the contract does not compare to what is really given when they come. Or false promises to have them pay a recruitment fee and then not being able to pay the debt because the conditions are not offered as it was offered when they first recruit them. And finally, the other element of means is coercion. Coercion involves psychological threats or threats of harm to victims or their families that will keep the survivors in the human trafficking situation. For minors, they don't have to prove means. Minors under 18 cannot consent to sex, therefore cannot consent to commercial sex, for example. So for minors, it's enough to show that he or she were induced for the purpose of commercial sex acts. Which brings us to the last element, the end. The end of the trafficking needs to be for the purpose of either involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, or sex trafficking. It's only for the purpose. It doesn't have to occur. So the end doesn't have to happen. You only have to show that they were recruited, for example, and under coercion for the purpose of debt bondage or slavery or sex trafficking. So I'm going to talk more about the elements and the definitions in concepts involved in it. People get always confused about these two crimes, the smuggling and trafficking. Trafficking is different from smuggling. Trafficking is a crime against a person, and smuggling is a crime against the border. Trafficking contains the element of coercion. You cannot consent to enslavement. And in smuggling, there is no coercion, even if conditions are bad and you may not be allowed to leave. But in trafficking, there is a purpose of exploitation, commercial sex or forced labor. Those trafficked are seen as survivors, but those smuggled are seen as criminals. Coercion is the threat of serious harm to or physical restraint against a person. It includes any scheme, plan, or pattern intending to cause a person to believe that failure to act would result in serious harm or physical restraint. So it involves psychological threats or threats to harm the victim or to harm their families, and that will keep the victim, so with the purpose of keeping the victim in a human trafficking situation. Coercion also includes another concept, the abuse or threatened abuse of legal process, which is very important in human trafficking. And you see it all the time. The abuse of legal process involves the use or threatened use of law or legal process. It could be administrative, civil, or criminal, family, in any manner or for any purpose for which the law was not designed to employ pressure on another person or to cause them to take action or refrain to take action. For example, threats of calling immigration or the police. In some cases, it could be also threats of divorce or taking custody of the children, threats of being blacklisted, taking their passport or immigration documents. All those are considered abuse of legal process and tied to coercion. Another important concept is serious harm. What is serious harm? Serious harm is defined in the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act as any harm, whether it's physical, psychological, financial, or reputational, as long as it is sufficiently serious under all surrounding circumstances to compel a reasonable person of the same background and same circumstances to perform any labor or commercial sex act to avoid that harm. For serious harm, you have to look not only to physical or psychological harm, but also there is financial and reputational harm. Financial could be having victims not able to do enough money to live or escape. An example of reputational harm could be for a married couple from Pakistan where the husband threatens the wife with divorce and gaining custody of the children. For a woman returning to Pakistan as a divorcee, there could be a huge reputational harm. So not only look for physical or psychological, which are the most common, you can also show serious harm by looking at the financial reputational harm. Serious is defined as, its definition is very broad. It almost includes everything that could be considered serious. Another important concept in the purpose of or end element is debt bondage. Debt bondage is very much discussed, and it's sometimes very difficult to identify. It is also known as bonded labor, which is when a person pledges their labor or services in exchange for paying off a debt, where the work belongs to the moneylender. That's important, the key to getting into debt bondage. The work or the services you are providing belong to the moneylender until that debt is repaid. So keep an eye when the moneylender changes exorbitant interests or keeps increasing the debt so it remains forever and out of reach for survivors. This is very common in sex trafficking. You have seen it. We have seen it a lot. I have seen in many cases where traffickers will charge for the smuggling fee. They're being recruited back in home country. They're charged for smuggling fees. When they come and they say, we just work at a cantina as a waiter, waitress, and you will pay the debt. But when they come, it's sex trafficking ring. They are forced and threatened because they owe that money to the trafficker to stay. And they will increase the amount many times. They will charge interest for anything. That I have one client that she while driving a car had an accident, and the trafficker decided to add to the debt the accident costs or expenses. So this is very common in sex trafficking. Look for the debt leveraging work. It's also very common in labor trafficking. Is the employer leveraging the work, forcing the person to continue working for them to pay them a loan. Loan companies are not leveraging the debt. So if, for example, in labor trafficking, you have a client that asks for a loan to a loan company, but that loan company is not tied or related to the trafficker, you cannot say that they're leveraging the debt to make you work. So you have to look for the employer being the one controlling the debt and forcing you to work. It may be considered, in that case, debt bondage. For example, employers may calculate and add to the debt, deduct from paychecks, make a victim pay in a way that they will not have enough money to leave, or they will have to stay to pay. So if you compare the definitions of involuntary servitude and coercion, they are very similar. The definition of involuntary servitude includes forced labor, has the general labor trafficking definition, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of the subjection to labor. And coercion is very similar. It is important to mention that for involuntary servitude, you need to show fraud plus something. So the means are fraud, coercion, and force. So for involuntary servitude, you can not only show fraud, you need to show fraud plus coercion or fraud plus force. Slavery fits in a broader definition of involuntary servitude. It includes physical force or threat of harm. Now, let's look at the immigration relief available to survivors. So the TVPA created two types or provided two reliefs for human trafficking survivors. The T-Visa, which provides a long-term relief and a path to citizenship, and continued presence that provides a short-term relief. T-non-immigrant status, which are called commonly as T-Visas, were created or established in the TVPA with a cap of $5,000 per year. That means that the Immigration Office or USCIS is going to only grant 5,000 T-Visas per year, but that cap has never been met. Both the T-Visa and continued presence require assistance to law enforcement with investigation or prosecution of the case. So the survivor to apply for both T-visa or continued presence have to cooperate or help with investigation and prosecution of the case to get those benefits. U-visas, which is another relief, it's also a long-term immigration relief available to victims of certain crimes, many of them, but including the human trafficking. Continued presence can be granted for a period of 2 years, and that's the short-term relief, and can be renewed. It is a temporary immigration status to potential witnesses of human trafficking. It comes with a work authorization and an arrival departure record, which is very important for many of survivors. They have illegal entry in many cases to the United States. And in those cases, with the continued presence, they will get an arrival departure record, which is very important in the process of getting adjustment or permanent residence in the future. Human trafficking survivors can be granted an extension for having active civil or criminal actions, so it could be renewed. The only thing is that only federal law enforcement agents can request continued presence. So attorneys, private attorneys, nonprofit attorneys cannot request for continued presence. Only federal law enforcement agents. Local law enforcement agents may request it, but they are going to need a federal sponsor. So I always tell my clients that anytime or every time they're meeting or having an interview with a law enforcement agent, they should request continued presence. What happens usually is that law enforcement will complete the necessary forms with the survivor and will file it with immigration, the immigration office. Law enforcement will also perform a background check, and it's going to need a supervisor approval. There is a blue campaign, and if you ever encounter an agent of law enforcement that doesn't know much about continued presence, tell them to reach out for the blue campaign from the immigration office, and they will offer help or support with these applications. Now, the T-visa, which is the long-term relief granted by the TVPA, like I said, has a cap of 5,000 that has never been met. Processing times are around 16 to 20 months. And the requirements to apply for a T non-immigrant status are that the survivor is a victim of severe form of trafficking, like we talk about in the first minutes of the definition, that the survivor is present in the US on account of trafficking, that the survivor has complied with reasonable requests for assistance in investigation or prosecution. This requirement is not applicable to minors under 18 years of age, or if you can demonstrate that the survivor has psychological or physical trauma that would it will not allow them to request to help with assist with investigation or prosecution. And finally, that the survivor will suffer extreme hardship involving unusual and severe harm upon removal. So if we talk about the T-visa, let's compare it with other reliefs available. You have the S visas, which are granted to foreign nationals who the Attorney General has decided are in possession of crucial information concerning a criminal organization or enterprise or a terrorist organization. The disadvantages in comparison with T visas are that S visas depend on the Attorney General discretion and having an active investigation, that S visas are designed for informants and witnesses. Sometimes you have survivors that apply for T visas that are not informants or witnesses in criminal proceedings. And finally, that S visas are, the control is in law enforcement. T visas, attorneys, private and non-profit attorneys can apply for T visa on behalf of a survivor, and the survivor would apply with the help of the attorney, and there is no need to get a law enforcement certification or approval. You just need to demonstrate that the person complies with the requirements. If you compare with asylum, the T-visa, asylum is a relief for immigrants who are unable or unwilling to return to their country of nationality because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. The disadvantages for asylum are there is just one year filing deadline since you enter the United States. For T-visas, there are no deadlines for filing. An interview is required for asylum. For T-visas, you don't usually need an interview with the immigration office. For asylum, it is hard to prove fear of persecution or being the member of a particular social group. Right now, it's very difficult. And there is currently a long processing time for asylum. If you compare the T-visas with another relief, the Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, or SIJS, that relief is available to certain undocumented immigrants under the legal age. Here in Texas, it's 18, but it could be 21, depending on the state, who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by one or both parents. The disadvantages of SIJS compared to the T-visa are that to apply for SIJS, you're going to need a custody court order before. If SIJS is granted, it cuts off immediate family, meaning that the minor will not be able to petition for certain family members in the future. And also for SIJS, there are wait lists for applicants for certain countries. So it can mean long processing times to adjust in the future. If you compare T-visas with VAWA, which is another relief, VAWA was established by the Violence Against Women Act for battered immigrants, so they can submit a self-petition to obtain immigration status without relying on abusive US citizen or legal permanent resident spouse, parent, or adult child. So the disadvantages for these cases for VAWA is that it requires immediate relative relation between the victim or the survivor and the abuser. And it has limited waiver of inadmissibility in comparison with the T-visa. What that means is that the T-visas come with one of the greatest waivers of all of grounds of inadmissibility. VAWA, it's limited. It can waive one illegal entry, overstaying, working without employment authorization, but not multiple entries. In T-visa, you can include those grounds of inadmissibility in your waiver. Also, U-visa, it's very similar to the T-visas. U-visa or non-immigrant status is a visa for victims of certain crimes, including human trafficking, who have suffered mental or physical abuse, so the survivor has credible information about the crime and is helpful to law enforcement or government officials in the investigation or prosecution of the criminal activity. The disadvantages comparing the U-visa with the T-visa is that U-visas require law enforcement certification. So it requires a form that has to be signed by the law enforcement agent stating that the victim has been helpful. Law enforcement certification is not required for T-visas. Many times you get it, but it's not required. Also for U-visas, principals and derivatives, both each must wait 3 years before applying for adjustment, permanent residency. In T-visas, only the principal needs to wait 3 years to apply for adjustment, and all derivatives will apply at the same time with the principal. Also, U-visas, if approved, they will not be eligible for federal refugee benefits. In T-visas, so T-visas are, when it's granted for survivors, they are considered, or they get the same federal refugee benefits as refugees. And finally, U-visas have a long wait list. Just like T-visas, there is a cap of 10,000 per year. And at the end of 2019, the Immigration Office, USCIS, stated that in a report that there were nearly 152,000 principal pending applications. So you can imagine, if they only apply, there is a cap of 10,000, and it can only approve 10,000 visas per year. And there are 152,000 pending, you can, do the math and see how long it's going to take for a client that just filed an application for a U visa. And which is not the case for T visas. The cap has never been met, and the processing times are only tied to what the immigration office is taking in reviewing the T visas. If you can look at the slides once you get them, you are going to be able to see that there are some resources regarding human trafficking and T visas. And I just want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure. And just back to you, James.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was a great presentation and for your comprehensive PowerPoint. Next, we have Dr. Albertito Guinto Sierra, who is a practitioner in Mexico City with an extensive academic background, including a doctorate and master's degree in law. Albertito practices in Mexico City, and he's now going to present to us in Spanish concerning the crime of human trafficking in Mexico. Welcome, Albertito.
Muchas gracias, James. Gracias por la invitación. Voy a hablar respecto de la ley mexicana en cuanto a la prevención, al combate, a la persecución sobre el delito de trata de personas. Esta ley, por supuesto, que ha venido México haciendo algunas modificaciones, se ha estado adaptando a las normatividades establecidas en la ONU y bueno, poco a poco México cada día tiene una mayor fortaleza legislativa para poder dar los instrumentos a las autoridades competentes para efectos de que puedan prevenir, erradicar y sancionar el delito de trata de personas. Esta ley, por supuesto, nos habla que se debe establecer a través de la propia ley, se llama Ley General para prevenir, sancionar y erradicar el delito de trata de personas. Es una ley nueva que ha sufrido reformas todavía hasta el año pasado, el año 2019, ha tenido esa adaptación a los estándares internacionales. Esta ley, por supuesto, establece diversos delitos o conductas que están tipificadas para que las autoridades puedan detener a todas estas personas que participan de manera directa en el delito de trata de personas. Ahora bien, tenemos, por ejemplo, que se castiga toda acción dolosa cuando una o varias personas tratan de captar, tratan de enganchar, tratan de transportar, de transferir, de retener, de entregar, de recibir o alojar a una o varias personas con fines de explotación. Esa es la parte genérica que contempla la Ley General para prevenir, sancionar y erradicar los delitos en materia de trata de personas y también para la protección y asistencia a las víctimas de los delitos. Viene una serie de características que ya veremos más adelante en cuanto que la finalidad que se castiga por la ley mexicana precisamente es la explotación de personas. La explotación que se hace a través, repito, a través de la captación, del enganche, de transportar, de transferir, de retener, de entregar, recibir o alojar a una o varias personas con esa finalidad de querer explotar. Ahora, esta ley también contempla, por supuesto, los principios para su aplicación de manera integral. Un principio de máxima protección con perspectiva de género, la prohibición de esclavitud y de la discriminación en términos del artículo 1 de la Constitución Política de los Estados Mexicanos, el interés superior de la infancia cuando en estos delitos se vean involucrados menores de edad, las autoridades tienen que proteger y tienen, por supuesto, que atender el interés superior de la infancia. Se deben hacer las debidas diligencias correspondientes para poder dar, sobre todo, mayor protección a las víctimas. La prohibición de devolución o de expulsión, el derecho a la reparación del daño. Nosotros no teníamos en México ese derecho a la reparación del daño para la víctima. Simplemente se investigaban los delitos, se castigaban los delitos y era todo. No había una reparación del daño para la víctima. Ahora hay una garantía de no revictimización a la víctima. No se puede revictimizar a la víctima. Lo que tenemos que hacer es precisamente darle todo el apoyo de manera integral para que la víctima empiece a recuperar sobre todo su estabilidad emocional, pero más allá de ello, su dignidad humana. ¿Ok? Cuando dentro de esto se encuentra un menor de edad, también esta ley establece que si la persona refiere ser menor de edad, se debe tener la presunción de minoría de edad. Se le debe de dar este trato a la víctima que refiere ser menor de edad. No se le puede cuestionar. Como dije hace rato, no se puede revictimizar a la víctima y mucho menos a un menor de edad. Ahora bien, todos estos delitos que se pueden cometer, dije hace un momento, de diversas maneras, desde que se transporta una persona, se retiene, se le entrega. Todas estas personas, por supuesto que merecen un castigo y la ley está contemplando un castigo mínimo de 5 a 15 años de prisión a las personas que intervengan en este tipo de delitos. Ahora, también se habla que la finalidad para el delito de trata de personas es la explotación. Veremos en algún momento el tema que contempla la Ley General para prevenir y erradicar la trata de personas, que se entiende por explotación. También tenemos la mendicidad forzosa, cuando se utilizan a personas menores de edad en actividades delictivas. Esto es, la adopción ilegal de persona menor de 18 años, no se puede hacer esta adopción con esta finalidad de que sean utilizados para actividades delictivas. Muchas veces también hay un acto civil de matrimonio, porque muchas veces las personas que se encargan de captar a sus víctimas les ofrecen matrimonio para poder después meterlas en el mercado de trata con diversas finalidades de explotación laboral, de explotación sexual, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces, todo esto está protegido por la ley. Hay gentes también que se encargan de realizar o de cometer el tráfico de órganos, el tráfico de tejidos, el tráfico de células de seres humanos, y la experimentación biomédica ilícita en seres humanos. Esta ley también castiga ese tipo de actividades, porque ya no nada más es el trabajo forzado, ya no nada más es el tema de la explotación sexual, sino también ya hay otros fines, como esto del tráfico de órganos, de tejidos o de células. Entonces, también se ha considerado en México como un delito de trata de personas. La esclavitud también es castigada en México. A quien tenga o mantenga a otra persona en una situación de esclavitud, la ley contempla una pena de sanción de 15 a 30 años de prisión. Todavía incluso, además de la esclavitud, se maneja en esta ley el término de siervo. Esto es, a quien tenga o mantenga en una condición de siervo a otro, ¿sí? Por un tema de deudas, por un tema, le llaman también por gleba, ahorita les explicamos qué es gleba. Si hay una deuda y mientras tú me debas, no puedes salir de aquí, tienes que trabajar para mí o tienes que realizar cualquier otra actividad delictiva o una explotación laboral, también se castiga ese tipo de conductas. Y la calidad de siervo por gleba se da cuando se le impide a esta persona cambiar o vivir o trabajar sobre una tierra que pertenece a otra persona. O sea, te obligan a que vivas y a que estés en un determinado lugar que no te pertenece, que es de otra persona, pero que ahí tienes que prestar servicios remunerados o no remunerados. Entonces, ahí todavía tenemos en esta ley castigo para cuando a la persona se le considera siervo por gleba. Cuando quien ejerce actos sobre ella son derechos de propiedad, por ejemplo, que impliquen también derechos sobre la persona, porque muchas veces los criminales consideran que estos siervos les pertenecen, que ellos les pueden dar el uso a las personas que les den el mayor beneficio. Vean ustedes cómo todavía, hace 2000 años se utilizaba esta figura y todavía el delito de trata de personas lo sigue utilizando. Y por ello México ha incluido en su legislación este tipo de castigo o este tipo de conductas para efectos de poderlas erradicar y poderlas castigar, sobre todo después de una excelente investigación. Cuando tenemos también se le castiga, también se le impone alguna sanción, pero sobre todo cuando este beneficio viene de la explotación de una o más personas, específicamente en temas de producción, de pornografía, de exhibiciones públicas o privadas del orden sexual, el turismo sexual o cualquier otra actividad sexual remunerada. México, pues todas estas zonas que se tienen de playas, de centros turísticos, de lugares turísticos, bueno, pues se da mucho, que viene mucho extranjero para efecto de una cuestión de pornografía infantil, de explotación sexual a través de la prostitución. Entonces, se está elevado esto a un nivel federal, eso es el Código Penal Federal, pero sobre todo la propia ley de prevención, de erradicación del delito de trata de personas, contempla estas conductas, independientemente de que cada estado de la República tiene también en sus propias leyes penales, tienen también el castigo a la conducta de trata de personas. Independientemente de ello, se ha dado a una autoridad, se ha creado una fiscalía especializada para poder investigar, para poder combatir este tipo de delitos, porque bueno, pues es de atención del orden federal, con independencia de que cada estado tenga en sus propias leyes el delito de trata de personas. Los medios comisivos que se utilizan para efectos de poder captar o cometer estos delitos, las personas utilizan el engaño, ¿sí? Hay lugares aquí en la Ciudad de México muy cercanos donde, bueno, pues a través del engaño a veces, repito, les prometen matrimonio, les prometen un trabajo remunerado, les prometen un cambio en su situación económica, en su situación, sobre todo económica, social, donde les dicen que tendrán demasiados beneficios, que saldrán de ese estatus. Entonces son personas vulnerables y es exactamente el tipo de personas que estos delincuentes buscan y a través del engaño se las llevan, las trasladan para después hacer una explotación de ellas con diversos fines. Otro de los medios también que utilizan es la violencia física o moral. Muchas veces los amenazan que si no acceden, si no los acompañan, si no se van con ellos, entonces le causarán algún mal a su familia, a sus padres, a sus hermanos, etcétera, etcétera. O amenazan a los propios padres cuando estos se encuentran en estado de vulnerabilidad. O bien, muchas veces también no hay necesidad del engaño ni de la violencia física o moral, sino a través del abuso del poder. Esto es, personas que tienen algún estatus en cierta área geográfica y en cierto medio social, bueno, pues a través del poder las obligan a que estas personas puedan incorporarse como víctimas del delito de trata o, sobre todo, aprovechamiento de una situación de vulnerabilidad, cuando las condiciones de estas personas son escasas, son extremadamente escasas, es cuando ellos aprovechan esa situación para hacerles un ofrecimiento económico y todavía incluso algunos lugares pagando a los padres para que sus hijas de 13, 14 o 15 años puedan ya incorporarse a estas actividades ilícitas aprovechando esta situación de vulnerabilidad. Hay un daño grave o amenaza grave también que hacen a través de pues grupos de delincuentes, grupos de la delincuencia organizada que se encuentran en diversas áreas y que estos, utilizando ese poder de amenaza, ese poder de daño grave, que puedan causar o causan a veces, privan de la vida a algún familiar si es que no acceden a que estas personas se integren como víctimas de este tipo de delitos. Entonces, México sí ha ido poco a poco incorporando más conductas, va identificando diversas formas que tiene, que hacen más bien los delincuentes. Ahora, hay actos por sometimiento. ¿Qué actos son considerados por sometimiento? Tenemos los pornográficos, quien produzca o se beneficie de la producción de material pornográfico, que engañe a estas personas para la producción de este material pornográfico y sobre todo la prestación de servicios sexuales o realizar actos pornográficos. Posteriormente, hacen difusión a través de las redes sociales, de revistas, de libros, de diversos actos. Todos estos actos están contemplados en esta ley para efectos de prevenir y erradicar la trata de personas. También se aplica, por supuesto, pena a todos aquellos que comercializan, que distribuyen todos estos tipos de actos de exposición, de circulación u oferta en todos estos actos pornográficos a través de libros, de revistas, de escritos, de grabaciones, de filmes, de fotografías o incluso de anuncios impresos, imágenes o objetos con carácter lascivo o con carácter sexual, reales o simulado. Lo pueden hacer de manera física o a través de cualquier medio. Ahora bien, se ha preocupado también el Poder Legislativo por imponer penas mucho más altas cuando se utilizan menores de edad y una explotación laboral. Cuando son explotados de manera laboral, todavía existe en este país zonas muy marginadas, zonas muy alejadas de la ciudad y entonces, bueno, pues se los llevan, los captan, los trasladan y los ponen a trabajar de una manera, pues, con mayores horas de trabajo, con trabajos muy duros, no tienen un beneficio de seguridad social, no tienen algún beneficio de alguna otra prestación que las prestaciones mínimas que establece la ley. Y entonces las personas que trabajan y como víctimas a estas personas que los captan o a sus patrones o las personas que cometen este delito de trata serán sancionados con una pena de 3 a 10 años de prisión, quien explote laboralmente a una o más personas. Porque estas prácticas van contra todo el tema de la trata de personas, van contra la dignidad humana. Las condiciones peligrosas o insalubres, sin las protecciones necesarias, de acuerdo a la legislación laboral o a las normas existentes para el desarrollo de una actividad o industria. La existencia manifiesta desproporción entre la cantidad de trabajo realizado y el pago efectuado. Decía hace rato, a veces trabajan 10 horas, 12 horas y la cantidad que les pagan es mínima. Este tipo, por supuesto, de conductas también son consideradas como delito de trata. Y el salario está por abajo de lo establecido. Ahora bien, para efectos de poder erradicar o aplicar una pena mayor, también se le considera a todas estas personas que cometen el delito de trata, cuando son 3 o más personas, se les considera también como parte de la delincuencia organizada. Entonces, nosotros tenemos una ley, que es la Ley Federal contra la Delincuencia Organizada. Ahí se estipula qué delitos van a ser considerados por esta ley de delincuencia organizada. Entre ellos, por supuesto, que se encuentra el delito de trata de persona previsto y sancionado en la Ley General para prevenir, sancionar y erradicar los delitos en materia de trata de personas y para la protección y asistencia a las víctimas de estos delitos. Esta ley establece que cuando 3 o más personas se organicen de hecho para realizar en forma permanente o reiterada conductas que por sí o unidas a otras tienen como fin o resultado cometer algunos delitos, en este caso el de trata de persona, será sancionado por solo ese hecho como miembro de la delincuencia organizada. Esto es, son 2 delitos autónomos. Te voy a castigar por el delito de trata de persona y te voy a imponer las penas que establece la ley para sancionar y prevenir y erradicar los delitos de trata. Más aparte, cometes, cuando son 3 o más personas que están organizadas para cometer el delito de trata, entonces, además, cometes otro delito que es autónomo, que se llama delincuencia organizada. Entonces, te castigo por delincuencia organizada y te castigo por el delito de trata de personas. Y también en este país tenemos, creo que es la única constitución en el mundo que establece en el artículo 19 los delitos que el juez debe de dictar prisión preventiva oficiosa. Esto es, que las personas que sean sometidas a un proceso por el delito de trata tienen que llevar el proceso dentro de un penal, dentro de un centro de reinserción social, no tienen derecho a la libertad, no pueden pagar ninguna fianza, ninguna garantía, sino que tienen que llevar el proceso dentro de algún centro de reinserción social. Esto es lo que conocemos como dentro de un penal. Entonces, en términos generales, esto es lo que tiene ahora México, esta ley general para prevenir, sancionar y erradicar los delitos en materia de trata de personas y para la protección y asistencia a las víctimas de estos delitos, además relacionado con el delito de delincuencia organizada. Los 2 delitos que son autónomos, pero que se suman las penas, los 2 delitos, de acuerdo al artículo 19 de nuestra Constitución, tienen oficiosamente la prisión preventiva oficiosa. Esto es, que no pueden llevar el proceso en libertad. Por mi parte, James, es todo. Te agradezco y estoy a tus órdenes.
Thank you, Albertico, for the great presentation. At this point, what we'd like to do is we're going to have 20 minutes approximately of questions for both our speakers. And then afterwards, it will be possible at a later date, we're going to have a live session when it's possible to ask questions of our 2 speakers. What I will do is ask each of you 3 questions and ask if you can respond. We'll take 10 minutes for each of you, and then we'll switch to the other speaker. First, Vanessa, we'll start with you if that's acceptable. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, can someone consent to human trafficking in the United States?
Thank you, James. No, you cannot consent to enslavement or human trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime. The key is to determine if the elements of process, like means and end, are there, especially if there was forceful or coercion. For example, in sex trafficking, a survivor may have entered a trafficking situation knowing that she would offer commercial sex, but she didn't expect to stay because she was forced or coerced. That is why it is important to ask about the reasons why a survivor has stayed in the trafficking situation. It was because she or he received threats, or owed money to the trafficker, or was physically forced to stay. There was no able for them to escape, or they were too scared to escape. So yes, no one can consent to human trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime. And in order to show that, you have to go and look at the element of means and see if there was force, fraud, or coercion.
Great, thank you. Can you also comment on how human trafficking victim survivors can be paid?
Yeah, so survivors of human trafficking can be paid. This is one of the misconceptions that people think that if you got paid for the work you did, you were not a survivor of human trafficking. Survivors of human trafficking can be paid. In labor trafficking, for example, it's very common to be paid. The important thing is to determine if there was, again, the elements of means, if there was any fraud, if the conditions that you were offered were not the same when you came, if the payment is less, for example, of what you were offered, and again, what are the reasons that a survivor decided to stay? Were they able to escape? Were they able to go and find another job? So it is important to determine if there was any force of coercion, even though there's payment. So yes, survivors can be paid.
Thank you. How does someone show that victims are present in the U.S. on account of trafficking?
Yes, so that requirement of presence on account of trafficking is one of the ones that we get requests for additional evidence very often. It does mean that you have to show why are they here today in the United States, why the survivors are staying here in the United States. You don't have to show it. Many people also think that that requirement is tied to being transported or smuggled into the United States, that you don't have to show. That's not the point of this question, the point or this requirement of presence on account of trafficking. For example, if a survivor, a survivor will be considered present in the United States on account of trafficking if they escape and they stay, if they were brought into the United States to cooperate with law enforcement. Sometimes people will go back to home country and they're brought to be a witness in a trial, or if they left and were re-trafficked to the United States, which is very common. People, especially minors, they will go back to the traffickers. For this requirement, for the presence on account of trafficking in the United States, we need to show the fear of retaliation. That's evidence that you can, if you have evidence of fear of retaliation, that if you go back to home country, you suffer or be harmed by your traffickers. Or it may be the need of services like medical services, counseling, that you are getting here in the United States that you're not gonna be able to get back in your home country. And also could be the need to cooperate with law enforcement. If there is an active civil or criminal investigation and you are a witness or you're cooperating with law enforcement, if you can show those, or you have evidence of those elements, you can show that you're here in the United States on account of trafficking. On the other hand, a survivor would not be considered here on account of trafficking if they are fleeing to the U.S. to escape trafficking. For example, if they were trafficking in home country and they're fleeing to the U.S. to escape it, or if they voluntarily left the United States, or they were deported or removed from the United States and never came back to the U.S. to help law enforcement. In those cases, you are not going to be able to show that you are here in the United States on account of trafficking.
Thank you. Does human trafficking involve transportation across borders? And how does that happen, if you can provide an example?
Yes. So, no, human trafficking does not necessarily involve transportation across borders. Moving is one of the elements of process, along with recruitment, harboring, obtaining, and providing services. But moving could mean, that the trafficker moves you or transport you from work to your home and from home to your work, and you are always, under surveillance. You are not able to escape. Again, you go to the elements of means, or where there is force or fraud or coercion. But in many cases, and that's why this is also a misconception, in many cases, in human trafficking, there is transportation across borders. So there is some recruitment in labor and in sex trafficking. There's some recruitment back in home country, and the trafficker will bring you to the United States to perform services, either commercial sex or any labor services. So it happens a lot, especially in labor trafficking. You can see it a lot. You see that the recruitment usually occurs back in home country. They have to pay for a recruitment fee. They come here to the United States to work under conditions that are false promises, right? They are promised that they're gonna pay, that the trafficker will pay a house, food, and that they will get very nice salary. But when they come, the conditions are not as they were promised. They will come and, for example, have a case in labor trafficking when for welders that they came here to the United States and they had to leave like 30 people in a house of three bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. And the conditions were not as promised. At the beginning, they didn't have a job. They have debts to pay for the recruitment fee. And so there's many things and elements involved. So it does happen, but it's not only, you could have, for example, you could have entered the United States and overstay or enter illegally and then trafficked a few years later or many years later, and also be a human trafficking survivor. It can involve transportation across border, but it's not necessarily what we're trying to say when you say in the process that moving is involved.
Thank you. What evidence can you provide for the requirement of complying with reasonable requests from law enforcement?
So there's a few documents that you can prove there's evidence to prove that you have complied with reasonable requests. And I want to say something about reasonable requests under the law. When it says reasonable, it means that law enforcement cannot ask a survivor to put themselves back in a trafficking situation if they're not safe. They cannot ask a survivor to be put in a situation where they're going to be unsafe. So that's why they use the word reasonable. And evidence showing reasonable request and that you comply with that requirement could be T certification, which is the same I was talking about, U certifications. It's a form that law enforcement completes that will be used to demonstrate that you are a victim of trafficking and that you have complied with any reasonable request to assist law enforcement. However, you may also choose to submit other evidence instead. You can use trial transcripts, court documents, police reports, news articles showing that, talking about the case, the criminal case, affidavits from other survivors, from your family, from the agent that you have helped, or other relevant, credible evidence that you can show that you comply with the requirement of reasonable request and cooperation to law enforcement.
Thank you. My last question is, how has COVID affected the response from the Immigration Office regarding human trafficking cases?
Yes. So COVID has affected the response from the Immigration Office. At the beginning, we saw some delays in processing times. Reporting the USCIS or Immigration Office website are showing a longer waiting time to a decision. Now that we are during COVID, before it would take around 10 to 12 months to get a decision. Right now, it's around 16 to 20 months. And that has been after COVID. However, they also have offered solutions. I mean, the USCIS office and the Immigration Office have offered solutions to applicants, giving, for example, more time we're required to submit additional evidence, or if applying for or filing an appeal of decisions that deny relief, you have a longer time to file within. Also, they are now accepting scanned documents and forms instead of the originals with ink signatures, which has helped a lot for attorneys gathering the documents from clients. For example, our office has been closed to clients and the public. And so we are arranging with clients to get documents. It could be scanned and we can file it, or clients have to mail. So it has affected the whole practice. It's taking longer preparing documents and having clients to mail it and meeting with them, which is not possible. And it has affected the immigration office, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you for all that great information. Now we're going to turn to Albertico to ask him several questions, and I'm going to ask the questions in English, then in Spanish, and Albertico will answer in Spanish. My first question is, in English, what changes has Mexico had in its legislation to prevent and combat human trafficking? O sea, ¿qué cambios haya tenido México en su legislación para prevenir y combatir el tráfico humano?
Sí, gracias, James. México en el año 2007, crea una ley donde únicamente castigaba ciertas conductas para el tráfico humano o la trata de personas. No era tan amplia, eran conductas muy cerradas, solamente el que trasladaba, el que transportaba o el que captaba. Y poco a poco, después en el año 2012, nace una nueva ley para efectos de ampliar ya este tipo de conductas, donde, bueno, como les leía hace rato, ya no nada más se castiga el tema de captar, de recibir, sino ya también el que transfiere, el que recibía, el que alojaba y que tenía esta finalidad, el que captaba o enganchaba y tenía esta finalidad de explotación. Y sobre todo, bueno, pues ya viene también la parte más importante, que es la atención a víctimas.
Gracias. Do Mexican laws protect victims of the crime of human trafficking? O sea, ¿la ley mexicana protege a las víctimas del crimen de trato humano?
Sí, James, ya esta nueva ley precisamente protege a las víctimas. Antes las víctimas con las otras leyes quedaban desamparadas, únicamente se preocupaban por castigar a los delincuentes y las víctimas no recibían ni atención psicológica ni médica, no había ningún apoyo para las víctimas. Ahora esta nueva ley sí previene precisamente y protege y asiste. Hay programas de asistencia para las víctimas, desde el tema de apoyo económico temporal, atención psicológica, atención médica, alguna situación de hogar. Si las víctimas son violentadas, bueno, pues también se les da un espacio exclusivo para evitar que sean localizadas. Hay un mecanismo de protección que le dan seguimiento a todas estas víctimas, de que siempre estén bien protegidas, que no sean localizadas, que no sean identificadas, porque muchas veces son amenazadas por este tipo de delincuentes. Entonces, México crea un programa mucho más amplio para poder dar una protección integral a las víctimas.
Thank you. How do you repair the damage to victims of human trafficking? O sea, ¿cómo se repara el daño a las víctimas de trato humano?
Ok, la reparación del daño, decía, debe ser efectiva, proporcional a la gravedad que haya tenido la víctima en el daño que le hayan causado, en su afectación de proyecto de vida, y comprende varias cosas. Una, la restitución de los bienes o la cosa obtenida por el delito. Se le tiene que restituir a la víctima los frutos y accesorios y el pago en su caso de los deterioros que hubiese sufrido, así como el pago de daños físicos, materiales, psicológicos que integran la reparación del daño moral. Todo esto lo tiene que cubrir, por supuesto, el delincuente. Esto incluye los costos de tratamiento médico, medicina, exámenes clínicos o intervenciones quirúrgicas si son necesarias, rehabilitación física, prótesis o aparatos ortopédicos, así también la terapia o tratamiento psiquiátrico si es necesario. La pérdida de oportunidades de empleo, o sea, todo lo que dejó de percibir o de tener como una persona normal cuando es sometida a este tipo de delitos, qué empleos perdió, la educación que ya no tuvo en toda esta perspectiva de vida, en toda esta proyección de su vida, que probablemente años fue víctima de trata, ya no pudo estudiar, ya no pudo hacer una carrera profesional, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces se hace una proyección integral para efectos de que haya una debida reparación del daño. La falta de ingresos también, si no tuvo, por supuesto, los ingresos que no tuvo al desempeñar sus actividades normales, entonces se hace una reparación de daño integral en beneficio de la víctima. Esto es lo que decía hace rato, la ley mexicana ahora le da una protección amplia a la víctima, ya no la tiene olvidada, no la abandona, sino al contrario, inmediatamente es a quien le da mayor protección.
Which criminal conduct does Mexican law consider as human trafficking? ¿Qué conducto penal considera la ley mexicana como trato humano?
Ok, bien, como trato humano, todas aquellas personas que se encargan de buscar a las víctimas, que le llamamos acá captar, ¿ok? Las personas que se encargan de engañar, posteriormente puede venir primero la persona que identifica a las víctimas, después la que se encarga de tratar de convencerlas, ¿sí? La que le llamamos enganchar. Entonces, las conductas son captar, enganchar. Una vez que estas víctimas ya están convencidas por cualquier medio, ya sea amenaza o por el engaño o el abuso del poder, ahora la persona que las transporta también es castigada. Quien las transporta, quien las transfiere o quien las retiene en algún lugar para posteriormente ser transportadas, y también quien entrega a las personas, a veces familiares, a veces amigos o cualquier tercera persona que pueda entregar a estas personas. Y también se castiga quien recibe a las personas o quien aloja a las personas. Todas estas son las conductas que castiga la ley mexicana en la Ley General para prevenir y sancionar y erradicar la trata de personas.
My last question is, how does Mexican law consider the exploitation of human trafficking? ¿Cómo es la ley mexicana considera la explotación del trato humano?
Ok, esta explotación se da en diversas categorías. Uno, la esclavitud, cuando hay este tema de que se consideran esclavos todavía, la condición de siervo, ok, la prostitución ajena u otras formas de explotación sexual, todo esto se le llama esclavitud, la explotación laboral, el trabajo o servicios forzados, también dependiendo de qué actividad los obligan a realizar, la mendicidad forzada, la utilización de personas menores de 18 años, que acá la mayoría de edad en México es 18, entonces personas menores de 18 años en actividades delictivas, también eso se le llama explotación, la adopción ilegal de personas menores de 18 años, algunos sujetos que cometen este delito para efectos de simular que les pertenece o que es parte de la familia, refieren a haberlos adoptado sin haber cumplido los requisitos legales. Y entonces cuando hay una adopción legal y ilegal y además los ponen a trabajar en diversas actividades delictivas, ahí también se considera explotación. Y ello también nos lleva a un matrimonio forzoso o servil. Esto es, cuando obligas a que la persona se case con el delincuente para que diga que es su esposa y que él puede hacer con su esposa lo que quiera. Entonces, este matrimonio forzoso o servil también está castigado como dentro del catálogo de explotación. El tráfico de órganos, de tejidos y células de seres humanos también está considerado como explotación. la experimentación biomédica ilícita en los seres humanos. Todas estas categorizaciones se están contempladas dentro de la explotación.
Thank you, Albertico. Thank you, Vanessa and Albertico, for your informative presentations, your time to prepare the materials, and on behalf of the USMBA, we very much appreciate your assistance. Hopefully, our audience has found these both presentations informative and will continue to support the USMBA. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.